Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we have all kinds of stuff to talk about. We've been on hiatus. That's on me. I apologize. I've been taking care of some stuff off the field, as some would like to call it. But we've got plenty of news to go through now. ESPN has released a ton of information on the new quarterbacks in Minnesota, Kirk Cousins and Trevor Siemian. And we've also gotten a ton of different information and kind of sound bites and all kinds of different stuff on, Sam Bradford heading down to Arizona, Teddy Bridgewater to the New York Jets. Case Keenum is in Denver as well. So we've got a lot to talk about. A lot has changed for the Minnesota Vikings over the last couple of weeks here. So we've got plenty to talk about there. And then we'll finish up with some stuff on Sheldon Richardson, the Vikings' new 3 technique. We'll talk a little bit about him and what he brings to the table with that defensive line, and finish up with some questions as we always do. So, all right, let's get her started here. Start with Kirk Cousins, because I believe that's probably the biggest name to discuss right now.
I would think so. I agree with that.
I would think so.
I agree with that take right there.
Yeah, the Vikings have one hell of a leader in Kirk Cousins, no doubt about that. And he's going to, the thought here is that he is, going to make changes. He's going to, be the elite quarterback that the Vikings have been searching for, and unfortunately were unable to find in both Teddy Bridgewater and Case Keenum. So he signs the first ever fully guaranteed contract, which is crazy.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal.
It's a really big deal. It really is. So, Drew, why don't you first start us off here by telling me a little bit about Kirk Cousins and what you think about the guy.
I mean, yeah, I in the past, I guess when I initially about the mutual interest between Cousins and the Vikings, I was a little bit skeptical just because of all the money it would take to bring in Kirk Cousins. But I think, the way you look at how the contract is structured, and the fact that, the Vikings needed stability at the quarterback position. There's kind of been some rocky waters at the position the last few years here. Not necessarily the fault of the organization or the players. It's just the way it's gone. And so I think hitting the reset button made some sense. And Kirk Cousins offered that option. And I think he's one of the best free agent quarterbacks to be available as an unrestricted free agent anyway in a long time.
He's probably the best. I think most people would tell you.
You can make the argument for sure, yeah.
He's an outstanding quarterback. He's been getting the job done for a very, very long time. And, he, from what I understand, he felt disrespected in Washington. And, I don't necessarily blame the guy, because you get stuck, you get hung up on a couple franchise tags, and why wouldn't you do everything within your power to get to a situation like Minnesota, who had a ton of cap room and could easily bring him on, and put the Vikings in a position to win this football game. This is it's exceptional. It really is, and there's not a whole lot to say beyond the fact that Cousins was kind of, rumors circulated throughout the season here. He felt slighted, and that's disappointing to hear. But at the same time, that's one of the reasons why Minnesota now had the opportunity to bring in, probably the best quarterback that's hit the open market in recent memory. A lot of people were fighting for Case Keenum. A lot of people were fighting for Teddy Bridgewater. A lot of people were fighting for a lot of different things. So, the Vikings are in a position now where they have their, quote, elite quarterback. And, why don't you tell me a little bit about what makes Kirk Cousins such a great option for the Vikings?
Yeah, and I think what I've kind of come to the conclusion here after watching Cousins and, looking at him and studying him a little bit, is that I think he brings kind of the best of both Sam Bradford and Case Keenum, because I think, you get that the pocket passing ability of Bradford. He can kind of zip it from the pocket, make all those throws necessary. And I also think you have the mobility of Case Keenum as well, where you get out of the pocket, make plays there. And he has that kind of, YOLO mentality that Case Keenum does a little bit, where he'll take those chances down the field and make those plays to guys deeper down the field. So I think you get a little bit of both of the games of Bradford and Keenum, and I think that's going to be nice to have, because Vikings have been able to work off of both of those play styles the last couple of years here, and Thielen and Diggs and these receivers. Kyle Rudolph they've been able to build chemistry there, and I think they won't be a huge adjustment for them because I think Cousins does bring both of those play styles together. So I think that's what I like about Kirk Cousins a lot, and then obviously too, I believe he's the only passer in the NFL the last 3 years to have 4,000 yards and 25 touchdowns in each of the last 3 seasons. Clearly, he's able to. He's a guy that you can rely on to kind of carry an offense in the event of a shootout, perhaps of a high-scoring game. You can kind of you're going to have a chance with Kirk Cousins to kind of keep up with those top quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers and Matt Stafford, for example, in the division. So I think there's a lot to like about Kirk Cousins, and whether you're scared about the money or you're scared about other things, I think at the very least you have a guy that again he can carry an offense and a guy that is going to provide stability at the position.
And Cousins, he also comes from, he comes from a position where he can, in theory, is a really good fit for what John DeFilippo likes to do, right? He's coming from a West Coast scheme in Washington that helps him kind of, better understand the situation that he's in. Coming to Minnesota, John DeFilippo, as we've come to understand, likes to use a lot of different weapons. And the Vikings, as it stands today, have a lot of those weapons. They've got Stephon Diggs. They've got Adam Thielen. You mentioned at the top of the show that Jarius Wright was released, but he could potentially come back.
Yeah.
So you look at all of these different kind of you look at all these different situations developing for the Vikings, and it's very plausible that this team could ultimately get a whole lot better with Cousins at the helm, because Cousins has operated in a similar offense and now has even more playmakers than he did when he was in Washington. You can make a case for Terrell Pryor being, a great option. Maybe he wasn't used well in Washington. You can make a case for Deshaun Jackson. You can make a case for their tight ends. Vernon Davis was very good as well last year. But
Jordan Reed went healthy, but the health was always a question mark a little bit for Jordan Reed.
Absolutely. So you've got all of these different playmakers, and it looks like Cousins is going to have the opportunity to do some big things here for the Vikings.
And I think the biggest difference for the Vikings anyway around him is the running game, because I think in Washington, you had, I think, Samaje Perine, you had Rob Kelly, you had kind of a mixture of, not guys that are household names, I guess we'll say that. And I think in Minnesota you're going to get Dalvin Cook, obviously a stud and one of the top rookies last year in those first 4 weeks before that unfortunate injury. And then Latavius Murray is going to be back on the restructured contract. That's huge for Minnesota to get his kind of short yardage efficiency as well. So that's a 1-2 combo right there that is going to be up there with the best in football, really. And I think that's another huge addition, I guess, for Cousins anyway, to have that. Instead, so I think there's going to be less weight on his own shoulders personally on offense most of the time here. And then obviously defensively too. I think joining the number 1 defense in football is certainly something that he probably likes that. He probably likes having a defense of that caliber on the other side for the Vikings.
Right. Absolutely. So from Kirk Cousins, let's move into Case Keenum next, because Keenum signs with the Denver Broncos. That has been made official. I have seen, I've seen people are not happy about this, and I've also seen people that are happy about this, and that just kind of comes with the position, right? Case Keenum, he's the type of guy who he's a can't please everyone type of guy, and that's just, that's the situation that he has put himself in, I guess. But he goes to Denver now, and as I understand it, he has more weapons to work with, and in Denver, he could still thrive. That's an amazing defense. You think about the position that Keenum was put in Minnesota, right? He has a great defense and a lot of playmakers around him. It only makes sense that Case Keenum would, at the very least, have potential to be very good in Denver because of what Denver likes to do defensively. So, it depends on how you look at it, I suppose, but I think that Case Keenum's a good fit in Denver as well, and while it may not always show up on the tape, it does kind of suggest that he has the opportunity here to be great once again.
Yeah, I mean, let's remember those days of Peyton Manning in town when Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders and company were lighting it up. And I think you get some kind of a regression in quarterback play there from whether it be Brock Osweiler, whether it be all these different names. Paxton Lynch has been in there a little bit too, but you see that regression there. And I think now you have a guy that's proven he can play with some Pro Bowl caliber receivers, and I would say that Thomas and Sanders are at least near that level. So I think Case Keenum definitely has a chance to thrive in Denver as well. That defense is still has a ton of talent. Obviously the age is a bit of a factor there as well, but there's still a defense that can get it done. And Case Keenum has shown again, you get the right guys around him, and he can make the throws, he can make the plays. So it's going to be interesting in that division now too. You got Derek Carr, you have Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City stepping as a starter too, and then obviously Phillip Rivers, the veteran for the Chargers. So that division is going to be very interesting because I think Denver could take a big jump if Keenum can repeat 2017. Denver could take a big jump, and that could shuffle things in that division.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now you look at Teddy Bridgewater, who's, I guess, the third in line here, and then we can jump into Trevor Siemian a little bit. Not a guy that I'm super familiar with, but I'll do my best. But with Teddy Bridgewater, the understanding with Teddy Bridgewater from the start, right? Once the rumors started circulating, we have all come to the understanding that Teddy Bridgewater ultimately wanted to start somewhere, and it sounds like the New York Jets are going to give him that opportunity. Yeah,
I mean, it's one of those things where I think the Jets have like 5 or something quarterbacks on their roster, but I guess I would say none of them are proven perennial starters. So I think that's where Teddy kind of can insert himself in there, impress some people in camp, make a name for himself there, and I think that starting job is very much a possibility for him. So and I would think it makes sense for the Jets to start him. I think they did just trade up to number 3, I believe, in the draft to presumably draft a quarterback for another name, but we don't know for sure.
I gotta cut you off there for 1 second. How interesting would it be for the Jets to bring in Lamar Jackson? And you have
for sure.
You have the 2 Louisville guys, and I'm sure that would I'm not going to try and act like I know how Teddy Bridgewater is feeling, but if you're in that situation, I mean, that's got to be difficult, right? In his situation to try to be the starting quarterback in a place where he's playing alongside a guy that he played with, didn't play with, but knows very well at Louisville, that would be a very good fit in my eyes. So Teddy Bridgewater has found himself in another situation where he's going to have to compete to win, but at this point in time, it looks like Teddy Bridgewater is going to be the starter based off of the introduction that the New York Jets gave him today.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I at the very least, he has a chance, right? He's going to have that chance to be the starter, and I think that's what he wanted all along. It didn't sound like that chance was going to happen in Minnesota, so he definitely had the right to go find a spot that would give him that chance. And I think, the Jets are one of those teams, they are rebuilding, but I think if Teddy's, this is a 1-year deal for him, so it's one of those where it's going to be, if he proves himself as a starter this year, and the Jets kind of can lay the groundwork for that rebuilding process, Teddy can be their kind of QB of the future, I guess you want to call it that. And we could see the Jets, in the next 3 or 4 years become a really good team and a team to be reckoned with. So I think that's a good fit for Teddy. That's kind of what he needed, a team that would take a chance on him, give him that opportunity to be a starter kind of as, and then they can kind of rework a longer term deal, give him that chance to be a QB of the future, because that's really what he deserves, essentially. Before that knee injury and everything, he was a quarterback of the future type player, and he can finally get that chance once again with the Jets.
Absolutely. So from there, I guess we can move into Trevor Siemian, and then we can talk a little bit about Sheldon Richardson and break into questions for the show. But with Trevor Siemian, interesting player. He's good backup for sure. Right. There's very little doubt in my mind that this is a guy that could play the game at a very high level. But I suppose the problem with that is, you don't necessarily know what you're getting with Siemian at this point, because he's had these very, very good starts, and then he's had these piss poor starts as well. So, he's a quality player and a quality talent, but I guess, my thought here is he just is he going to be a career backup? Is this another move by the Vikings to put themselves in a position to, essentially to bring in a quarterback that can get the job done, but may or may not have the ability to do so. It's just a very interesting situation, and it's tough to say what Siemian, brings to the Vikings beyond the fact that he's going to be backing up Kirk Cousins.
See, I really love this move because I think I love it because you get, you're signing a quarterback to a very large contract, very lucrative contract, on the per year basis, the most expensive in NFL history. But then you bring in a backup in Trevor Siemian, who has a bunch of starter experience, and he's going to be coming in. His base salary in 2018 is going to be less than $2 million. So you're combined what you're spending on the QB position is much less, and it's very close to what the Jets are going to be spending essentially, and they're going to have all these different guys in there. Whereas the Vikings are just going to have Cousins and Siemian, and then they're going to have Kyle Sloter as well. Likely that's going to be the three quarterbacks. So, and Siemian, you got a guy with starter experience, and like you said, a lot up and down for the most part. Hasn't been terribly consistent, but he's shown flashes. But I think it's a really good situation for the Vikings because I think what we saw in 2017 with Case Keenum, you get a guy that's up and down in his career, but he comes into the right situation and things can happen, right? So I think that's what why I like this move is Siemian, I think, could be something similar to Keenum in that, if something were unfortunately to happen to Kirk Cousins, knock on wood, I think Simeon's a guy you can at least contend in games with and possibly win some things and keep your season alive. Yeah,
Siemian he's incredibly talented in the sense that, he's very talented in the sense that he has been able to come in as a spot starter and throw quality passes and give his team an opportunity to win. Now, at the same time, he's had guys kind of looking over his shoulder his entire career. This time, it feels to me like it's fairly definitive that Kirk Cousins is going to be announced as a starting quarterback.
I would hope so. I would hope so, right?
Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman and Ziggy Wilf and everyone else involved there. They have,
that'd be one expensive backup.
Exactly, that would be one very, very expensive backup. So it's an extremely difficult situation for the Vikings, but at the same time, they're in a position now where they can get the job done with this guy. He's he's good at what he does, and he has the capacity for excellence, but it's still questionable, I guess. It's a situation where you just can't really know for sure whether or not what you're going to get with Trevor Siemian. And the big thing here that I like about this move, and the kind of the people that I have talked to that have basically explained to me why they also like this move, is because he is an established spot starter. This is a guy that has proven that he can basically step in any game situation and huck a couple footballs around. That's the positive energy that I get from Trevor Siemian.
Yeah, and John DeFilippo has been pretty good with backup quarterbacks, in the recent past, right?
Hasn't been bad.
Yeah, and that's, we talk about how the quarterback play last year for the Vikings, no Bradford, Bridgewater was down, and you have Case Keenum come up and he shows out and he earns his money. How valuable now are we seeing anyway that the backup quarterback position is? The Eagles just won a Super Bowl with their backup quarterback. Vikings made it to the NFC Championship game. It's important, and so I think it's rare to get a guy with the starter experience Siemian has, and the way by the way, he was not supposed to be a starter ever. I think he was either 7th round pick or undrafted, and he kind of shocked the world by earning a starting job with Denver, I believe, 2 years ago, a job that he wasn't supposed to have. So I like that move. I do like that, and it's rare to get a backup like this with the starter experience he has, and yet the youth that he has as well. I think that's a pretty good combination there.
Yeah, so that about rounds out the Vikings quarterback situation. I believe Kyle Sloter's still out there. He is reunited with his former Denver teammate, Trevor Siemian. Right. So you have that connection.
We're just picking quarterbacks from Denver. That's all the Vikings are doing. Denver was in their Kirk Cousins running, and ultimately the Vikings are taking Cousins, they're taking Siemian, they're taking Sloter, all from Denver.
Again, you look at the situation, and it makes a whole lot of sense, does it not? It makes a lot of sense. So That's kind of how I see it with the quarterback situation. Let's jump into a little bit of Sheldon Richardson now. Before that move is, I believe that move was made official today. I saw on the Vikings official website that he was announced by the team, and he kind of he made himself known immediately. The quote that I remember specifically from Sheldon Richardson that I really enjoyed was he was talking about. He was basically saying, I'm here to win football games. It's a one-year deal because that's what I wanted it to be. And the New York Jets and Seattle Seahawks, watch out. That's kind of how I understand it.
And I'm pretty sure the Vikings play both teams in 2018. At least I know they play the Jets for sure. I'm not 100% sure if they play the Seahawks or not. But I agree that he's out for blood with those two teams. It seems like he's going to have an extra chip on his shoulder, which I really like. Right. But as far as on the football field and how he fits in, I think it's a tremendous fit. The Vikings, they've kind of both Sharif Floyd and the Vikings. I mean, obviously for Sharif Floyd, that was devastating, the whole injury situation he had and how his career has kind of derailed itself. But Richardson kind of comes in and essentially allows the Vikings to pick up from where they left off with Floyd. You get a 3-tech that can. He's very versatile. He can also play nose tackle if needed in the case that Joseph is unable to. But he's a pass rushing specialist in there. He can also stop the run. He's very powerful in there, and I think he and Linval together is one of the top kind of interior lineman combinations in the league, if not the best. And it's one of those things where it looks like the Vikings, the front office is really making a run at 2018 here. When you bring in Cousins, you bring in Sheldon Richardson. That's one heck of a loadout there for free agency. You get 2 Pro Bowl caliber players right there. I really like this fit, and I think it's now it's about Julio Johnson stepping up as a depth piece, Shamar Stephen being back as a depth piece. What do they do in the draft and the rest of free agency? But I really like that starting 4 of Griffin, Richardson, Linval Joseph, Danielle Hunter. That's one heck of a group right there.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about how Richardson affects the defensive line real quick, and then we can kind of jump into some other things. But when you look at Richardson and what he has been able to accomplish, he's massive, right? And he's an extremely talented 3 technique. So he does a very good job doing that, and he does a really good job just in general of being a very complete player that has maybe gotten some negative press throughout the years. But he can come in and step in immediately for the Vikings. He has the opportunity to do some really big things immediately. So, it's a situation for the Vikings where you have to like it because pairing him up next to Linval Joseph, I mean, that's outstanding in itself, right?
It rivals the Williams wall. I mean, if
does.
not, it has the potential to be better. I mean, and that's saying something because those 2 guys were freaking dominant. And
then on top of that, you mix in Danielle Hunter and also Everson Griffin, and you've got a quad of incredibly talented defensive linemen here, and it's hard to imagine a world where it's not perfect for the Vikings defensive line heading into next year.
Right. I mean, it was hard for me to imagine a move for the Vikings this offseason where you're like, wow, the Vikings defense just got that much better, right? Because of how well they performed in 2017. I mean, they're number 1 in scoring, number 1 in points allowed. I can give you all the numbers, but the Vikings defense was the best in the NFL last year. And so there weren't many moves out there that the Vikings could really go after and actually improve this defense with a significant amount. There's just not that much room for improvement. But Sheldon Richardson is one of those moves that they could make. And again, the fit with Linval as kind of the interior of that defensive line is just awesome. And I'm really excited to see how, all the different packages and, stunts, what have you, that Zimmer and Andre Patterson put together with those 4 guys. It's going to be really fun to watch. And other, opposing quarterbacks, Rodgers, Stafford, Mitch Trubisky in the division especially, have got to be very scared of that unit.
Absolutely. So from there, let's hop into questions for this show, and we'll wrap this thing up and have another one up for you guys, I believe, on Friday. The plan for the off season is to record on Mondays and Thursdays.
Perfect. We'll get in here from our friend Daryl Staffrin. He asked us about the Vikings releasing Jarius Wright and what the plan is afterwards. Is Treadwell going to step up? Is it a sneaky draft need? That was also asked to us by Joe Schneider. I'm at JoeSchmo84 on Twitter. So what do you think about the Jarius Wright move? Do you think they might draft a guy late, or what do you think about the Laquan Treadwells, the Stacey Coleys, Caleb Jones, is the guys that are would be expected to replace him if he's not back?
Well, it's tough to say, really. I look at it in a couple of different ways. First and foremost, it's tough to gauge what Jarius Wright's value is right now.
It is,
being that he was released and kind of, he was used in that first down mode, right? He was always used to be a very talented player that can basically get the first down, and that's about all we really know about Jarius Wright at this point in time. At the same time, I'm not entirely certain of what Laquan Treadwell's role is going to be either. Again, he played some very important snaps for the Vikings, and he worked very, very hard. But at the same time, how could you expect Treadwell to, take this big step forward if you haven't seen anything from him on the field, as Mike Zimmer alluded to in his most recent press conference? So I like both of those players, but the Vikings are still loaded at wide receiver. You've got Diggs, you've got Thielen, you've got Caleb Jones, who I've always really liked, and maybe he hasn't gotten enough credit for what he is. But all of these different players, I'm a big fan of all of it. So I suppose we'll see kind of what happens, but that's how I see it today.
Right, and to answer the question about draft need, I'm kind of not. I don't see it as a big draft need again, and I think that's probably just because of how I think of Stacey Coley. I know the last training camp he was the guy I thought was going to end up on the 53 and have a big role last season. And obviously your thoughts on Caleb Jones too. He's also a special talent as well. So I think the Vikings are fine on younger talent kind of stepping up, and they're both going to find themselves with the opportunity to be on the 53 and have a big role. I think the question here then is whether Jarius Wright is brought back or not. It might come down to Treadwell playing more outside, and then you have either Thielen or Diggs taking that kind of first down role from Jarius Wright, right? You have a guy that, in Jarius Wright, that was very, very good at moving the chains. Now, does Diggs or Thielen take that role out of the slot most likely, or would it be even Stacey Coley? Or that question will have to be answered because Wright usually operated out of the slot and was able to get those first downs. So now someone else would have to step in there because Diggs moved outside last season. Thielen played a little bit of slot, but that chain moving role was definitely Jarius Wright out of the slot. So that role will have to be filled by somebody, whether it be someone new, whether it's Jarius Wright coming back, or whether it's Laquan Treadwell, Coley, Caleb Jones, one of those guys.
Excellent. Yeah. So it could be a number of different things for the Vikings wide receiver situation. I'm sure this is something that we'll see pan out more and more throughout the offseason now.
Yep. Our next question from our buddy Mr. Mason at @IKeepIt_SoReal on Twitter.
So real.
There it is. With the addition of Sheldon Richardson, where do you rank the Vikings defensive line in the NFL?
Oh, man. It's got to be top 3.
Yeah.
Has to be top 3. I would argue top 1 or 2.
Yeah, I would too.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I've studied every single defensive line with all the moves that have been made over the last couple months here. But the Vikings defensive line has to be right up there with the best right now. It has to be.
Right. I would say it's either Minnesota or Philadelphia as the number 1 defensive line. Philadelphia, they added Michael Bennett, and obviously you have Fletcher Cox, you have Brandon Graham. You have all of these studs in there too. So I think it's one of those two, but I think definitely Richardson for sure vaults them into the top 2 in the NFL because that's a lot of talent on that front four, as we already mentioned in the show. Next one here from Mike Kraus at mkraus28 on Twitter. Do you expect the Vikings to go offensive line heavy in the draft?
I think you have to lean yes. And I think that guard has to be –
yeah.
It has to be, right? It has to make the most sense because guard is a position now where the Vikings, they're not sure what they're going to have with Joe Berger. They're not sure what they're going to have with the rest of the offensive line just yet. All that is really known at this point is that Riley Reiff is going to be on the left side. I saw that Mike Remmers, I believe, is going to be playing guard.
Yeah.
So There's some things that can be moved around here, but it's difficult to say whether or not the Vikings want to, upgrade an offensive tackle, potentially to upgrade that right tackle spot, or offensive guard, a la what we saw the Dallas Cowboys do when they were building their terrific, defensive line.
Right, and I mean, I think,
offensive line. Excuse me.
I think they're going to go guard at 30. I think, they'll go offensive line at 30 for sure, number 30 overall. A couple of options have been kind of highlighted before. I don't know if you follow Jordan Reed on Twitter, but he's always highlighting these prospects. Isaiah Wynn, Billy Price, a couple of names that have really popped out, and the kind of interior offensive linemen that can also play multiple positions. Seems like that's what the Vikings really like, is guys that can play more than one position. So whether the Vikings stick Mike Remmers at guard or they move him back to tackle, I would expect the Vikings to go heavy offensive line, because that's what you have your franchise quarterback now. And it's up, and now you got to protect him, right? I mean, the Vikings have had these injuries they drafted Teddy Bridgewater, an injury, and again, that was not on the offensive line from what we know. But injuries, the offensive line, or the lack of an offensive line and lack of pass protection, can lead to injuries at quarterback. You don't want your $84 million man going down with an injury, and the best way to prevent that is to go heavy offensive line in the draft to build a solid franchise offensive line, like the Dallas Cowboys, like you mentioned, what they did.
Right.
That'd be that step, because we saw how well Tony Romo and Dak Prescott and all these guys performed with that offensive line. They went 12-4 in 2016 for a reason, right? And the offensive line was obviously a huge part of it. So I would definitely expect the Vikings to go heavy on the offensive line in the upcoming draft. But our final question from Eli at Skullseas. Are you eyeing any other free agent signings for the Vikings here? I believe they have something like $10 million in cap space here to work with, something along those lines. Is there anything else you're eyeing at this point?
Not really. I've looked at a couple of names out there, but I'm not particularly interested in any of them, to be honest with you. I think that the Vikings are set pretty much right now, given their kind of cap situation. And I'll reiterate this once again. Part of having a good cap situation, what's important to it, is re-signing the guys that are already there, the ones that you already really like. So I would say the Vikings need to be smart, and they need to think about the fact that there are plausible options out there potentially, but it might be more important to retain or re-sign guys like Anthony Barr, guys like Trey Waynes, etc.
Right. And you mentioned having a good cap situation. The best way to have that is to hit on your draft picks, hit on your kind of shot in the dark, your undrafted free agent, for example, Tayshaun Bauer and Kyle Sloter, a couple of guys that are clearly promising players that were undrafted free agents. But I would add that maybe adding a kind of a depth cornerback such as Bryce Callahan, the guy that can play out of the slot from Chicago. There's been some interest there from the Vikings, from what that's been reported anyway. So that's an option, and I would not hate that option at all. But I understand too, kind of taking a step back and realizing, okay, Kirk Cousins and Sheldon Richardson, that's one great free agency get right there. That's an incredible combination of players to get in free agency in one offseason. So, and to your point, making sure you can retain all of your free agents or all of your guys that are going to need extensions, that's very important as well. And I think the Vikings understand that. And, Rick Spielman and Rob Brzezinski they're very good at what they do. And so I think, it's cliche, but trusting them might be the best option at this point.
Absolutely. So as far as I know, that wraps up the show. So thanks again for joining us. And once again, we apologize for the recent hiatus. We will be back for sure later on this week. Like I said before, the plan for the offseason as it stands today is to do shows on Monday and to do shows for Monday and shows for Friday. So if you're a subscriber, you'll be able to get them as soon as they go up. If you're not a subscriber, I don't really care. But, do your thing. So, thanks for watching as always, folks, and we'll catch you later on this week.